Back to Tools of Fighter Pilots, the podcast where we break down the mindset, tactics, and culture of elite aviators and apply them to business, leadership, sport, and life. I'm TC, and with me, as always, is Richo, Richardson.
Thanks, TC. Good to be here. Looking forward to this one. High standards has been just kind of the normal because, I joined the military when I'm 17 and all of a sudden people are screaming at you because your shoes aren't polished properly. You're sleeping on the floor so you don't mess your bed up because there's a bed inspection the next morning. And all these high standards are being forced on you. But then you start operating military equipment and you kind of realize why, because if you don't do things at a very correct, high level with a lot of attention to detail, you kill yourself very, very quickly, as I'm sure you've seen as well.
That's right. You're relating this one right away to safety. I like always to recall a nice article from Billy Flynn. He's a Canadian aviator, a legend in his field. And he pointed out in a post, Fate, Luck, and Choice, Caesar salad, how he's basically he's making his Caesar salad. And, sometimes compromising the ingredients can weaken the very foundation of who we are and what we do. So today we are exploring why high standards matter and when they should evolve and what happens when they slip.
Yeah, it's just been part of my life and all through professional aviation, we've kind of had them enforced on us for very good reason. But yeah, looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, let's start with the basics. High standards, what are they really? Some might say they're just rules or guidelines, but in reality, they are a mindset. Let's say they set the benchmark for excellence. And Jason, I learned this one when I was in pilot training in the States, especially. Everybody was talking about standard. You have trained pilots as well. How do you explain the importance of standards to a new guy, a new aviator?
Yeah, I think when they step into that environment of military flying training, they work out very quickly that the standard is high. When you're holding an altitude, what's the standard? Like if you're trying to maintain 3,000 feet, well, if you can see that you're not at 3,000 feet, like if you can see the needle is not there, you try and correct it back. And that just gets embedded in you. I think high standard is doing something beyond strictly what is practical, maybe what is required. Of course, we talked about safety standards and they're a little bit different, but in general, through an organization, if you think about, that guy has very high standards. He's going above and beyond. So there'll be an acceptable level to do something which gets the job done and it will achieve the output that's required. But a high standard will go above and beyond that. And as I'm sure we'll explore, there's very good reasons for doing that.
That's a great point. I think another aspect that, it adds up to this is the clarity that they provide in the end in the environment that you work. Right away, we can see that is not only applicable to aviation, but once you have set up the standards, it's also applicable to whatever you're doing in business, in life, in sport, also in your family dynamics. If you set certain criteria that you want to achieve as a family, then you provide clarity to all the members, and there should be no doubt. And this one, we've discussed about this one so many times. It's a way of reducing variables in order to, whatever the goal is. Now you're reducing variable, and you have this kind of let's say structure that helps you out to achieve the results. Sometimes, we're humans and we want to mess up with the recipe, going back to the Caesar salad. Why is that?
Yeah, because the bottom line is high standards are hard. And that's why a lot of organizations don't have what you would call very high standards, because it's costly. You have to sacrifice resources, time, money, to maintain a very high standard. So I guess that's why. And as humans, we're always looking to take shortcuts. And I'm sure we're going to get into this, but this is where if standards start to degrade, it's very dangerous because that new lower standard becomes the norm. But I like the point you were talking about in organizations, reducing the variables. And I think if you link a standard with a procedure, you know, I'm a huge fan of procedures like you are. If your organization or if you do routine tasks all the time, if your sales team does the same thing all the time, or your project management team do repeated tasks, you want to do them to a high standard, obviously, because you're in a competitive environment, you're trying to win. If you can write down the best way to do that particular task and have that as world's best practice for that thing, then, you know, you can operate to that level every time, and everyone can read that procedure and they know what's expected. So, yeah, I think writing procedures and high standards often go very much hand in hand.
To touch again this point, you know, writing down and putting them, you know, on stone, it doesn't mean that you cannot vary the standards, because, you know, organizations evolve, like we have seen it in the Air Forces. You know, when we got the F-16, we found some SOPs, and then the SOPs that we had in 2003, where we got the airplanes, were different from the one that we had in 2005. So the organization evolved in a way that you needed to review things. So sometimes people is like, oh, but standards means only doing things by the book. But those books are not written in a ink that you cannot delete, or you cannot make correction, or you cannot expand. These books are made by people. They are going to evolve through their, you know, business journey, or work journey, or lifestyle journey. It happens also to sport. You know, we can see that, okay, we're going to use this certain, I don't know, we are using training levels to train with power and heart rate monitor power for running. So now we need to change the way that we were doing things, always keeping it a high level, because, you know, with the standards, as you said before, we're looking for performance. So by reducing the variable, that performance can get to higher level, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's many advantages with doing it. Like, as a leader, if you try and delegate many tasks without having, it's very difficult, because you don't know what the guy's going to do. You don't know what the girl's going to do when you delegate a particular task. If you have a set of procedures, you know that people know that benchmark way of doing things, and it is going to provide a certain output that you are aware of. So it's very powerful for that. But of course, they can be varied. They can be amended, of course, and they do get amended. When I was flying the Hornet in Australia, our SOPs, we'd been flying the Hornet for quite a long time. So our normal day-to-day SOPs didn't change very often. Like maybe there'd be an amendment once a year. Tactical procedures changed a lot more, because as technologies evolved, the response and the tactics would have to change for that. But yeah, like without having this benchmark standard, this procedure that we would go out and fly, I mean, you would routinely say to 3 other fighter pilots, if you were leading them, start, taxi, takeoff will be SOP. And that covers like 100, 200 different tasks. It also covers what we do if the crosswind's up this side of the runway, if the crosswind's out of limits. Like, all these myriad of things are involved in that statement, start, taxi, takeoff will be SOP. So it's very powerful. It cuts down briefing time. It gives everyone clarity on what we're going to do, so we can concentrate on the chaos of operations and spend our time briefing and thinking about what's going to happen that's not going to be normal today, that's going to be unusual. Of course, the procedures that we write have to fit into this, you know, plan, brief, execute, debrief, respond framework. And like I say, if you have been doing the same task for a long time, maybe the response, you're only going to get a response once a year. But if you're running a startup and you're learning and you're writing your procedures from scratch, you'll be wanting to amend them almost continuously until the organization kind of stabilizes. So many reasons for building procedures and having those procedures done at basically best practice, so that everyone is used to operating in that particular way.
I want to touch 2 points regarding what you just said. Takeoff, going to the area, coming back, standard. When you go into the briefing, then somebody didn't go like the standard. Okay, so maybe we need to change the standard, or maybe the errors and mistakes that we've been done were because the pilots or the people in the organization didn't have the standard clear. Okay, so which brings to a point where, you know, standard has to be powerful, but also has to provide clarity. The other point that is bringing what you were saying is, when do we know that it's time to adjust a standard versus, you know, just keep this standard here? But people are continue making mistakes, you know, keep forgetting that one. So maybe if we change the standard, okay. So we have two areas here to discuss. First one, let's discuss, you know, the let's say the format of the standard. And then the second one is, when do we need to change the standard, or when do we need to stick as a leader, as a team member? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, the format of the standard is going to, I think, change depending on the type of team you're in. But you know, in the Team Synergy QRH, the manual I wrote for the Formula One team, I wrote a chapter on, you know, how to write your procedures. And it's very simple, but it's like, you know, as an organization or as a small team, list every routine task that you perform regularly. So it's things that you do over and over. And then have a subject matter expert write a procedure for that. So someone that is very knowledgeable and very skillful with that particular task, have them write out the best way to do it. And then you just disseminate it through the organization. And, you know, how you do that will depend on the size of the organization and the means that you have. But it's getting this best practice laid down and then, of course, communicated. I mean, I'm sure, as you saw in your military, our military, we would get tested on standard operating procedures when we were learning. So we were, and of course, not all organizations are going to do that. But as part of onboarding, as part of leaders setting an example and leaders using the procedures often, it starts to get embedded in the organization. You mentioned before that you don't always need to comply with SOPs, and of course that's correct. There's going to be many situations where you need to brief something or you need to do something that's non-SOP. That's absolutely fine. What procedures do and defined standards do is give you a method to fall back on, and it gives everyone common knowledge of the same, how to perform the same task. Easy to delegate, you know, it's going to be completed. You can cut down briefing time. All these things are powerful reasons to do that. The second part of your question, when do they need to change? I guess the most obvious one in probably in commercial aviation more so, but certainly in military aviation, is when there's a crash. We used to have this saying that SOPs, our standard operating procedures, were written in blood, because we have a big crash and we see something in our organization that has to change in order for that crash never to happen again. So a classic example would be when in the 80s, 70s and 80s, guys, we lost quite a few airplanes because pilots would drop their bombs at low level and they would perform the recovery, and then they would look back over their shoulder to watch their bombs go off. We've all had that temptation, right? And as they look over their shoulder, they increase the angle of bank and the airplane flies into the ground and they die. And so the procedure, which has been written in blood, is that you will not look back and try and observe your own bombs after your pass. You'll fly the planned, defined egress and the recovery from that weapons pass, and that's it. So that's one example. Another example, I mean, there's many in commercial aviation. Readback requirements on the radio. We had, you know, the worst aviation disaster ever in the 80s at Tenerife, where a 747 collided with another aeroplane that was backtracking on the runway and killed almost 600 people. And this is because misinterpretation of a radio call. So after, you know, these things happen, it's very clear that this can never happen again. And this is why aviation is so tight on this kind of stuff. And we're so used to procedures, because the risk and the catastrophic consequences when these things go wrong are too great for us to bear. So we have to change the procedure. It's not like we didn't make the sale or we didn't finish the project on time. It's like, no, we killed 300 people on that airplane. So there's this huge drive and this impetus to change procedures so that we become safer.
Standards, in the end, as you're saying, it are fundamental tools for leaders, but also for the teams in order to guarantee safe procedures. And also as a leader, you need to understand when you need to push, for high standards, in a fighter squadron, if you have young guys, and as you said, everything is written, but the skill is not there yet. It's useless to push the guys to go through let's say some missions where their skills are not there yet. Okay, so anyway, when you're trying to achieve high standards, there is always the discussion on how do you get there. Okay, building blocks. So in a way, as a leader, you need to have at some point an holistic approach to see where the organization is, and then set the standard high, but still keep it there as a target. Okay, and if safety is infringed, then obviously stop and set up new standards, or as you said, written in blood. And this reminds me of the old times as a student, where the IP, the instructor would write down in the grade sheet, not standardized. Okay, which will lead, standardized. You didn't read the book. You were not safe today. Okay, so you don't want to be the wingman that when you go and fly, the senior guys don't want to fly because you're not standardized and you're not safe. You want to be the guy that everybody wants to fly and wants to have him as a wingman, or he wants to have him as a leader. So this creates also what you've been talking a lot in your book and your post, the circle of trust. Okay, because it's kind of unifying the organization once you have high standards and very clear and tailor to whatever is the goal of the organization. What is the danger? Obviously, you spoke a little bit, but what is the danger of letting standards degrade, especially in, let's say, outside of the aviation? So now we are transferring whatever is our experience into whatever is outside. So what is the danger of letting standards degrade?
Yeah, so standards degrading in aviation will lead to safety issues. Standards degrading in organizations will lead to morale, high separation rates, because people that were there when everyone was striving to do something great have seen how that has slipped. And actually, people don't want easy. People want challenge, and they want to maintain high standards, and they want to feel like this organization they're in is a bit different. A case from my own one of my own screw-ups, one of my many screw-ups I made in aeroplanes. We had a standard way of strapping into the ejection seat in the Hawk 127. With the lanyards that went around our upper leg. So we have, as you pull the ejection handle, as you know, but for the viewers, there's lanyards that drag our legs back close to the ejection seat as we pass through the canopy, so our legs don't flail around and get broken on the way out. There was, in this particular airplane, it was kind of painful to have to set it up the way the SOP described. So I had stopped doing it, and I hadn't seen any issue whatsoever. So basically I had this long flapping piece of lanyard that was loose, but it was no issue, because when I flew all of the normal fighter missions that I flew in this airplane, never had any consequence whatsoever. So I used to leave this piece of lanyard on both legs just quite loose instead of pulling it through and stowing it away properly, because time pressure, it was a pain in the backside. It's just quicker to not do the SOP. Then I went and started training to do my low-level aerobatics qualification. And the first flight I did with in the back seat, but observing the current display pilot, we did a inverted pass over the airfield at 500 feet. And when he went to roll out of this inverted pass, there was a restriction on the stick. He could still roll out, but I looked down and my lanyard had lifted up and had gone over the top of the control column because I didn't follow the SOP. Now, that may very easily have caused both of us to die. Like if he couldn't get, if that had have affected the controls in a slightly different way, maybe we would have pulled into the ground, and we wouldn't have been able to get out of that situation. So, you know, it's time pressure. Following SOPs sometimes is hard. It's uncomfortable. It's inconvenient. It costs more than taking shortcuts. We've seen this over and over again in industry. Look at Boeing with the 787, the things that have come out over the last 10 years with Boeing's laps, taking shortcuts on getting things correctly inspected and getting the correct checks done. And I remember years ago, there was a quote from one of the very senior Boeing guys saying, look, we may need to compromise on engineering to get the airplane out on time. And of course, you know, no one ever comes to work aiming to make a mistake or aiming to be negligent, but these pressures they creep up on us very slowly. Another classic one is the space shuttle, the Challenger disaster in 1986. This is a classic case of normalization of deviance. So people start with very, very high standards, and the very, very high standards are the social norm in the organization. Yes, they take more time and they're more costly and they're a bit of a pain in the ass, but everyone does them. And then people start taking shortcuts. And then over time, they see that nothing happens. There was no problem with taking that shortcut, like me with the lanyard around my leg. So then that new standard that has slipped down to here becomes the norm. And then maybe there's more shortcuts taken on that one. And again, nothing happens. So over the months and the years, what we start off with a very, very high standard slips down, and we have what they call normalization of deviance. So we've deviated now a long way from where we once were with our standard. And of course, we've now given up many of the defenses for accidents and incidences that were built into that initial procedure. So yeah, it's a long way to say, but it's very, very insidious. There's a lot of pressure on people to take shortcuts. We all feel it. I certainly feel it. But we need to understand that in a lot of cases, the standards have been written in blood, and they are there to protect us. Either there to protect literally human life, or they're there to protect quality or some other metric that we're concerned about in the organization.
I love this topic. I love what you're talking about, because I read the book, The Infinite Game, of Simon Sinek. And in there, it's talking about the ethical fading. Now, probably he's not talking about flight safety related things or standards written in blood, but it's saying that sometimes we get to the point that we are justifying small deviations just because, you know, it's a tick in the box. So, you know what, just do the tick in the box and don't do what is written in the procedure. And before you know it, people are following in that situation. So the organization is compromised at this point because things were non-negotiable. Standards are non-negotiable things in the life of an aviator. They should be non-negotiables also in a business, or they should be non-negotiable in life, to a point that, you know, you have this ethical fading, but everybody is doing like this. Now the standard doesn't have a value anymore. And an organization becomes from being elite to become mediocre. And, we have seen that so many, especially large organizations, they have this tendency to flatten a little bit the high standards because, there is a critical mass there. And so just one or two, they can create a group where everybody's following the standards. But then at this point, it's the team leaders that they need to reinforce, and they need to review the standards. If the standards are not working, there is no point to keep enforcing something that is not working for the people of the organization, But like you said before, the best practices are given by experience 99% of the times, and we as aviators, yes, we have a lot of science in what we do. We have a lot of mathematics, but experience, if you think about Boyd in his in the book, is talking about, achieving with skills and practices and everything. So it's something that is not written in stones. And that's what leaders should do, and team leaders. It's from top to bottom up. I think that you agree that one, especially with the work that you're seeing in with Synergy. Formula One activity that you're doing in coaching, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like every single thing to do with behavioral change in an organization, everything comes down to, well, everything relies on the leader modeling that behavior. So for sure, if a leader starts to not use an SOP and everyone's watching the leader all the time, even if they don't aren't consciously aware of it, we're all watching the leader, and if take shortcuts, then that becomes the norm much faster than if one of the team members does it. The leaders are all responsible for their own culture. So even though you might be in a large global organization, you still are responsible for the culture for your direct reports. And of course, that culture has to be compatible with the larger organization. But the power that leaders have to change the behavior and to set the norms inside their team is very, very powerful. So yeah, it's hugely important.
Now, we know the high standards matter. We're talking about performance. You're talking about organizations that live basing their activities on high standards. We know that standards can evolve when necessary, but also we spoke a little bit about the risk of letting the slip. So how, if you need to give an advice of a leader of a team, how do you hold the line? How do you make sure the standards stay high in any organization, in any, let's say, activity or in life?
Well, the example that you set as a leader is the most important. Some people won't be aware that the standard can be higher. I use the example of Toto Wolff quite often. When he first joined Mercedes, he walked into the organization for the first time, taking over on his day one, and he saw dirty coffee cups in the sink, and there was yesterday's paper sitting on the coffee table. And he went to one of the senior executives and said, like, how can this be a Formula One team? And they're like, that doesn't matter. It's like, that doesn't make the car go faster. But Toto saw that differently. He saw that all these things do matter, and it's upholding standards across your whole organization that are important in that particular type of team, a team that is looking to, raise performance across the whole organization by 0.5% or 1%. It is important that everything be spotless. It is important that procedures are very precise. So the leader has to set the example himself. The other thing that's very powerful and important for leaders to be aware of is one of the powerful things that comes from having procedures is that when you're coaching someone, when you're debriefing someone, when you're trying to impose, I guess, a standard, it's not you saying, hey, mate, you need to be as good as me. What you're doing is you're saying, look, we've got this aspirational standard up here. We have these standard operating procedures, and we're all trying to reach this standard. I come short, and today you came short in this particular area, but I also came short in a particular way. So it stops, again, we've talked about before in the debriefing episode, it stops this perception that it's a personal attack. So having standards that the leader acknowledges are higher than what he sometimes can perform at helps everyone trust the leader, and it makes it not appear like I'm getting debriefed because I can't do the job as good as him. It's not. Everyone is trying to do the job up here because that's what's best for the organization. That's what's best for the team. If anyone's confused about leadership and about how to try and influence your team, just remember your example is the most powerful way. There's other ways, but your example, your modeling of the behavior that you want is the most powerful way to set the social norm or the culture inside your team.
Lead by example, or leaders eat last as well. Okay. And you touched
exactly.
a very valid point, which is the humbleness of recognizing that if a standard is so high to achieve, then as a leader you can make mistake. You may be short of reaching it, which puts the leader in the team in a position of like communicate as well. Okay, because we had last episode was about debriefing. So now in the debriefing, in our safe circle, we can talk about what went wrong and then see how next time we can achieve better in accordance with the standard, in accordance with the procedure we have. So effectively, high standards are not about perfection, because as a leader, you can make mistakes, or as a team member, but they are about commitment to the kind of level, to excellence, and then you touch this point many times in your work. It separates the best from the rest. It separates the mediocre organizations to the best organizations. It separates to a normal work to an excellent work on something amazing, something fascinating, and so on. So it crucial aspect of any organization. Jason, how can you inspire the listeners in order to remember about high standards? I think you have a couple of examples.
So yeah, you look at the way leaders behave. Look at some famous examples. Winston Churchill, World War II. He became his attitude and his standard and his behavior inspired the United Kingdom to keep fighting. He said when he was being elected, "I've got nothing to offer you except blood, toil, sweat, tears." And that grit and that determination was what held that country together through the onslaught of World War II. You look at Elon Musk, the signal that he gives when he sleeps on the floor, the billion-dollar boss sleeping on the floor in the office because his work ethic is so strong. So that's important in his organization. I'm not saying that's right for everybody, but that's a signal that he's signifying what his organization is about. It's about extremely high performance. It's about hard work and never giving up. Bill Walsh, San Francisco 49ers, a fantastic leadership study. Guy took over the 49ers. This was during the early 80s, and they were really struggling. And he took them to many Super Bowl championships. I've got a quote which I'll read from Joe Montana, considered maybe the greatest quarterback ever. They said, Joe Montana said about the coach, "We saw his own hunger for perfection, and it was contagious." So this is the power. This is the power that leaders have when they're modeling behavior. The leader can't be arrogant when he's doing this. And you talked about humility. It's so important that the leader acknowledges that he comes up short sometimes. But when your team watches you strive and keep trying and trying and trying to get better, it builds trust and it builds loyalty. It's not weak to make mistakes, but it builds trust. And the leader's example is just so important.
It looks like standards define you as a leader. If you let the standards slip, then you lose control of your identity, but also of your organization identity. Whether you're a fighter pilot, an entrepreneur, a coach, your standard is the shape of your success. And now we are not talking about just achievements, because those are daily achievements, but we are talking about a long-term project of life. You're talking about your long-term journey, which includes setting these values. In the end, we can define standards as values that you stick to them. They can evolve during your journey, and in an organization they're going to evolve because the organizations are going to evolve. That's an infinite game, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is not going to be for everybody. I think it's applicable to all businesses, but the bottom line is most businesses aren't going to sit down there and write procedures because it's just too hard. And most people don't want hard, they want easy. But average is easy, that's why it's popular, as they say. The people that I work with and the people that you work with are people that are hungry to be at the top. They're in a highly competitive environment. They are dealing with adversaries that want to see them fall, and they have to maintain very, very high standards. So we touched on a little bit this idea of perfection. And I remember talking to a client about this last year. There's various views on this, but I've got my view, and my view is that it's not wrong to aim for perfection. I think that's a valid way of trying to get better. What's important is that you don't be too disappointed when you don't achieve perfection, because you're never going to achieve it. I'm a believer that when you write your procedures for flying a brake turn in a fighter jet, making a sales presentation, how your personal assistant answers the phone to people outside your organization, that you should aim for perfection in those things. And you should know what perfection looks like. It's okay to come up short, but at least everyone's aware of what perfection looks like, and knowing that and striving for it, but realizing that we're always going to come up a little bit short. It doesn't stop people being motivated. It inspires people, because people love high standards. They love to be in an environment where people are sacrificing and trying to move ahead and to get better and better every day. So hugely powerful. I'm a fan of aiming for perfection, although I never achieve it. I just think leaders have to be very careful how they approach that and not seem like they're setting unrealistic expectations for their team.
How comes you didn't achieve a perfection? I mean, historically, I can see, like, and this to chit chat for our listener, you are Australian, I'm Italian, culturally very different in terms of how we approach the standards. But, thank God I'm a fighter pilot. So at least some of my shortfalls have been mitigated by this lifestyle. But yeah, true. As a fighter pilots, we shared how important, how much is important to have high standards as well for success, because we see how much the rewards are worth for when you're using high standards. So you can have said better. It's a rewarding process. You're following, you can see the results, right?
Yeah, it's a rewarding process, and that's the thing. It is about the process. It's like the Stoic philosophy, the archer. Do everything you can to shoot well. Know what the perfect archery shot looks like. Strive for that. And it doesn't matter what happens to the arrow even. It's that striving, that trying to get better, that builds strength of character and builds quality and builds team spirit and builds motivation inside the team. There's many reasons to set high standards, but for sure, being in an organization which has very, very high standards, as you've seen and I've seen, is a very, very exciting place to be, providing that the leaders approach it in the right way.
Thank you very much for your words, Jason. Really, really great stuff. I like this topic. The thing is, if listeners want to talk to us a little bit more, we have the handles in the notes and in the bio. So you can contact us and book some time with us. This is the end of the episode. Subscribe, share it, listen it, watch it. The handles are down there in the links. Until next time, keep your standard high. I'm stealing your final phrase. Keep your standard high and execution precise.
Thanks, TC. I'll do my best. I'll probably come up short again, but I'll try.
Always. Sounds good. Bye.
Thanks, buddy.